Long before the first city rose from stone, before ploughs touched soil or sails caught wind, the earth was a wilderness alive with creatures whose names we now whisper as legends. The world of our distant ancestors was not quiet. It rumbled with the footsteps of giants, echoed with the calls of beasts, and breathed danger into every shadow. For the humans who lived then, survival was not a birthright. It was a daily miracle. Imagine stepping into a forest at the edge of the Ice Age. The air is sharp, the ground damp with moss, and in the distance, snow-capped peaks guard the horizon. Between the trees, the ground trembles with the weight of moving herds, bison, aurochs, and mammoths, larger than any living elephant. They move like slow storms across the plains, carving trails through grass taller than men. But behind them and around them lurk the hunters. There, among the tangled shrubs, a pair of golden eyes glint in the fading light. The saber-toothed cat, silent as the wind, waits with patience that could stretch into hours. Its fangs, curved, gleaming, as long as a grown man's hand, are not only weapons, but symbols of terror. To see one leap from the shadows was to see death itself descend. If you are enjoying these videos, please subscribe. I am curious to know from which part of the world you are watching this video. Please comment your city and time. In the caves of the mountains sleeps another ruler of the wild, the cave bear. Enormous, shaggy, and powerful beyond measure, it towers over humans, its very presence able to silence a valley. A mother bear with cubs was not merely a threat. She was a force of nature, swift and relentless, crushing all who dared draw near. And prowling the open plains were lions, yet not the lions we know today. These were cave lions, larger, stronger, moving in coordinated packs. Their hunts were swift storms, scattering herds, seizing the weak. Wolves, too, darker, leaner, more cunning than those who now share our world, followed humans at a distance, always testing, always waiting for the moment of weakness. For early humans, every sound carried meaning. A snapping twig was a warning. A sudden silence in the birdsong meant that something somewhere had begun to stalk. The wilderness was not passive, it was alive, aware, watching. And in this theatre of giants, our ancestors were not kings, they were prey. Our ancestors had no claws, no fangs, no thick hides. Their bodies were soft compared to the armored hides of rhinos, fragile compared to the bones of mammoths. A single swipe from a bear's paw could crush a chest. The bite of a cat could silence a life in an instant. What they had instead was awareness, eyes that searched, ears that listened, and a mind that remembered. To walk the plains was to gamble. A family leaving the safety of their cave to fetch water might return with wood and food, or they might never return at all. Predators struck when least expected, from behind trees, from over ridges, from the cover of grass. Fear was not a fleeting feeling, it was a constant companion, shaping every choice. And yet, in that fear, there was also growth. Humans began to gather not only as families, but as tribes, for safety. Alone, a person was fragile. Together, they became more than prey. Their strength was not in muscle, but in unity. A watchman at the edge of the camp, an elder who knew the trails, a mother who remembered the places of danger, these were shields as real as stone. When the sun set, the danger doubled. Darkness was the realm of predators, and the night was their hunting ground. The glow of eyes in the distance was a reminder that the world beyond the firelight belonged to others. The air filled with sounds, the low rumble of lions, the high yips of wolves, the guttural breath of something vast moving through the undergrowth. Inside caves, families pressed close together, listening. The crackle of fire was their only comfort, but even fire could not silence the roars that rolled across valleys. Children hid their faces in their mother's arms, not daring to look at the shadows. Elders whispered prayers, not of gods, but of survival, words passed down from those who had seen too much. To sleep was not easy. It was broken by sudden starts, by dreams where fangs glistened and claws tore through flesh. And yet, in the uneasy sleep of those nights, humans survived. Each dawn that broke over the horizon was proof of victory, however small. It was in this world that the first great lessons of survival were carved into human memory. Not all dangers could be fought, and not all battles could be won. Strength alone meant nothing. What mattered was attention, patience, and the ability to learn. A tribe that ignored the warning silence of the forest often vanished. A family that failed to keep its fire alive was never seen again. But those who remembered, the ones who passed knowledge from parent to child, from elder to youth, those were the ones who endured. From these struggles, humans began to form something new: stories. They were not mere tales, but maps of memory, instructions for survival disguised as myths. A story of a lion in the tall grass was a warning to watch the horizon. A tale of a child carried off by a saber-tooth was a reminder never to stray from the group. In those days, humans did not dream of ruling the earth. Their place was humble, and they knew it well. The beasts were the masters of the land, and humans walked lightly, careful not to draw their gaze. Every journey outside the cave was made with caution. Every river crossed, every meadow hunted, every night survived. It was a triumph. And yet, in that fragile place, something powerful stirred. A spark not only of fire, but of resilience. For though the predators ruled with tooth and claw, humans had something the beasts could not match: the ability to remember yesterday and imagine tomorrow. That, more than anything, would shape the future. In the beginning, the night belonged to the beasts. Darkness was their ally, their cover, their hunting ground. Humans were slow compared to the lion, fragile compared to the bear, and powerless against the wolf pack that melted like shadows into the night. For countless generations, when the sun sank, fear rose. The world beyond the edge of sight was alive with eyes, with hunger, with dangers that no spear of bone could stop. It did not come suddenly. Fire was not invented in a moment. It was discovered, stumbled upon, borrowed from the earth itself. A tree struck by lightning, flames rising from dry grass, the smell of smoke carried on the wind. At first, humans feared it. Fire could burn flesh, destroy forests, and chase prey away. But those who lingered near discovered something else. Beasts kept their distance. To touch the flame was pain, but to sit near it was safety. Slowly, carefully, humans learned to carry embers from one place to another, to feed them with twigs, to shield them from rain. At last, the night was no longer endless terror. A ring of fire became a wall, a fragile but powerful shield that pushed the predators back into the shadows. Imagine a camp on a frozen plain. Families gather close around the fire, its glow flickering on faces, turning fear into warmth. Beyond the circle of light, wolves pace, their eyes reflecting gold, their bodies weaving silently through the grass. They do not cross the fire's boundary, they test it, they circle it, but they do not dare enter. The humans feel a new strength. Not physical, not of claw or fang, but of unity. They feed the fire as though it were alive. Children fetch sticks and dry grass, elders blow gently on the embers to keep them breathing, and hunters return with branches heavy on their shoulders. All understand that this light is life. The fire changes everything. Sleep, once a dangerous gamble, becomes possible. Stories, once whispered in fear, are now spoken aloud. Songs rise into the night. The fire is more than protection, it is the beginning of culture. Around its glow, humans begin to share, to remember, to dream. But fire is not only warmth and safety, it teaches discipline. A flame left untended dies. A careless hand can scatter sparks that burn the camp. A storm can smother it, and then the circle of safety collapses. Keeping fire alive becomes ritual, almost sacred. In some tribes, a single ember is guarded as though it were treasure. It is carried in hollow bones or clay vessels across rivers and mountains. To lose it is unthinkable. To keep it burning is to carry the heart of the tribe itself. The fire also teaches patience. It demands steady feeding, not too much and not too little. It teaches timing, the rhythm of tending and waiting. And in this rhythm, humans find their first lessons in responsibility. The fire binds them together, for no single person can guard it always. It is a duty shared. The predators learn too. They circle, they watch, they wait for weakness. A dying fire invites danger. When the flames sink low, the wolves creep closer, the lions test the boundary, the bears sniff the air and take bold steps toward the camp. Humans discover quickly that fire is not a weapon to use once, but a constant task. The battle against darkness is never won, only fought anew each night. Yet with time, the predators begin to respect the glow. The memory of fire becomes etched into their instinct. They come close, but they do not enter. They snarl, they pace, but the fire remains a silent guardian. Humans, once prey without defense, now hold something that even the mightiest saber-tooth hesitates to challenge. As generations pass, fire becomes more than survival. It becomes spirit. Around its glow, myths are born. Some tribes say fire was stolen from the sun, carried down in the claws of a great eagle. Others believe it is a gift from the earth, a spark of life that connects humans to the heart of creation. Children listen to these stories with wide eyes, staring into the flames as though they might glimpse the spirits within. The fire dances, crackles, leaps upward, and in its movements humans see messages, omens, and voices. It is no longer just protection. It is meaning. When a hunter dies, sometimes his body is burned, his spirit sent upward in smoke, carried to the sky. When a new fire is lit, blessings are whispered, promises made. The flame becomes part of the tribe's soul, as vital as breath. With fire, humans grow bold. They step farther from caves, venture into open plains, hunt at dawn and dusk with the assurance that they can return to light. They experiment with cooking, with hardening spear tips in flame, with warming stones to carry heat through the cold night. And slowly, courage replaces constant terror. The beasts remain powerful and deadly, but no longer invincible. The line between hunter and hunted begins to shift. Humans are still small, still fragile, but now they carry with them a sun that never sets. Yet fire is fragile, and humans know it well. A rainstorm can drown it. A river crossing can snuff it out. An accident can scatter embers into useless ash. To survive, humans must protect it always. This fragility becomes a symbol of their own place in the world, strong only when careful, enduring only when united. Every flame that flickered in the darkness was not only light against predators, it was a reminder. Survival is not certain. It is tended, guarded, earned, and as long as the fire burned, so too did hope. The night did not end with fire alone. Even with flames dancing against the shadows, even with sparks rising like stars into the sky, danger still pressed close. The beasts were patient. They knew the rhythms of humans, knew when hunters left and when camps grew careless, knew when fire sank into embers, and so survival demanded more than fire. It demanded watchfulness. Among the tribes, certain people took on the role of watchers. They were the ones who sat at the edge of the circle, eyes fixed on the darkness, ears tuned to every rustle of grass. Their duty was heavy, for a moment of inattention could mean death for all. While others slept, the watchers listened to the forest breathe. They knew the sound of leaves stirred by wind and the sound of leaves stirred by paws. They could tell the difference between the quick scamper of a rabbit and the heavy tread of a wolf. They knew when the silence of birds meant that something vast and silent was moving below. The watchers were chosen not for strength, but for patience. They were often young, quick in hearing, or elders whose bodies no longer hunted, but whose senses remained sharp. They were the living shields of the tribe, their eyes more valuable than spears. A watcher who dozed even for a heartbeat risked everything. And so stories were told of watchers who failed, and of the devastation that followed, to remind each generation that the night showed no mercy. From this need grew rituals. A watcher might smear ash beneath their eyes, believing it gave sharper vision. Some held charms of bone or claw, taken from predators defeated in the past, as protection. They whispered songs to themselves, slow chants, to keep their minds awake. And in those long hours, as the fire hissed and cracked, they sometimes felt as though they were not merely guarding against beasts, but standing at the edge of the world itself. The night was not empty. The beasts were clever. Wolves circled quietly, testing the distance between themselves and the fire, their eyes glowing faintly as they slipped between the trees. Lions crouched low in the grass, waiting for the smallest lapse, a chance to strike at the young or weak. The cave bear, restless after leaving its den, sometimes wandered close enough for its breath to be heard in the dark. These were moments of tension so deep that the air itself seemed to hold still. The watcher, heart pounding, would reach for a burning branch, raising it high to drive the beasts back. More often than not, the fire was enough, but the watcher never relaxed, for he knew the predators were not gone. They were waiting, always waiting. And yet humans did not simply fear, they learned. Every encounter became a lesson, every survival a piece of memory carved into the mind. Children were taught to recognize the signs as soon as they could walk. They learned to smell the musky odor of lion fur carried on the wind, to hear the difference between the howl of a wolf calling its pack and the cry of a lone animal, to read claw marks on trees as warnings that the bear claimed that path. Knowledge became a shield, sharper than stone. It was in this era that humans began to track not only prey, but also predators. They followed the paths lions took to water, marked the territories of wolves, mapped the mountains where bears slept. They knew where the great cats crossed the rivers, where the shadows were most dangerous at dusk, where it was safe to gather berries without risk. This knowledge was carried not in maps, but in stories, in songs sung to children, in marks carved into bones and stones. Every generation added to this memory, and with it, survival grew more certain. The Watchers of the Dark did not only guard the tribe, they became teachers, passing down the signs of danger. Around the fire, they told tales of what they had seen. They described the way the grass moved when lions crept, the silence that fell before wolves attacked, the sudden flight of birds when a bear passed. These tales became lessons, and lessons became law. To ignore them was to court death. Over time, humans began to act as one body, each part supporting the other. Watchers warned the hunters, hunters protected the gatherers, elders guided the children. Survival was no longer an individual effort, but a shared duty. The predators still circled, but humans were learning to circle too, around each other, around the flame, around their fragile hope. It was not only by watching the beasts that humans learned, they also learned from themselves. When a tribe lost someone, they did not bury the memory. They remembered how it happened. A child carried off because the fire burned too low. A hunter lost because he walked alone. a mother taken because she tried to face a beast with only a stick. These stories were painful, but they were also sacred. To forget them was to invite the same fate again. To remember them was to grow stronger, and so memory itself became a weapon. While the lion relied on strength and the wolf relied on numbers, humans relied on memory. They remembered where the lion struck last, where the wolf pack prowled, where the bear emerged in spring. They carried this knowledge forward, not in the bodies of the strong, but in the minds of the living. This habit of watching, of remembering, began to shape something deeper. Humans grew not only cautious, but curious. They did not only fear the beasts, they studied them. They asked questions. Why do lions move here and not there? Why do wolves hunt more when the moon is full? Why do bears follow rivers at dusk? These questions were not idle curiosity. They were survival. Each answer gave humans a little more control, a little more safety in a world that did not favor them. The role of watcher grew respected. It was a burden, yes, but also an honor. To sit at the edge of the circle, to hold the line between the tribe and the darkness, was to be the tribe's eyes. Songs were made for the watchers, stories told of their bravery. Some were remembered as heroes, not because they killed beasts, but because they saw them first, because they gave the alarm, because they saved lives by noticing what others did not. Over time, the practice of watching grew into something more. Humans began to see patterns not only in predators but in the stars above. The same patience used to track lions in the grass was used to track constellations across the sky. The same discipline that kept eyes open in the dark was used to mark the cycles of the moon. In this way, the role of the watcher became not just survival, but the beginning of wisdom. But at its heart, the task was always the same. To survive the night, someone had to remain awake. Someone had to stare into the blackness, to meet the glowing eyes of beasts, to hold the fire high when danger pressed near. Someone had to sacrifice sleep so that others could rest. And in this endless task, humanity learned its most vital lesson. Survival was not the work of one, but of all. It was the bond between those who watched and those who dreamed, those who guarded and those who were guarded. The beasts still prowled, the darkness still threatened, but with fire at their backs and watchers at their sides, humans endured. And in enduring, they grew into something more than prey. They became a species that could outlast the night. Even with fire burning and watchers alert, even with memory and knowledge protecting them, humans still faced loss. It was an inevitable part of life in a world dominated by predators. A careless step, a moment of distraction, a night when flames flickered too low, any of these could lead to tragedy. And yet, loss, as painful as it was, became another teacher, carving wisdom into the hearts of the living. Tribes told stories not of victory, but of absence. A hunter who left before dawn might never return. Children playing too far from the fire could vanish into the darkness, leaving only the sound of distant roars behind. Mothers who tried to defend their young sometimes fell to the claws and teeth of creatures stronger than the strongest man. Each story was repeated not to terrify, but to instruct. Each tale of loss was a map of danger, guiding the living to act with care, attention, and unity. Humans learned quickly that survival required more than courage, it required humility. To challenge a bear or a saber-toothed cat directly was foolish. To underestimate the cunning of wolves was deadly. Each encounter with death reinforced the need to respect the predators, to move cautiously, to act together. Strength alone was not enough. Wisdom was as vital as muscle, patience as critical as speed. In some valleys, entire families vanished in a single night. A bear may have claimed one group while a pack of wolves struck elsewhere. The survivors would gather the next day, their grief sharp and raw, and begin again. The night had taken loved ones, but humans endured. They carried the memory of the lost, and in that memory they found knowledge. Where a family was lost, paths were changed. Where a hunter died, new strategies were developed. Loss became an instruction manual written in heartache and survival instinct. Some of the dead became legends. A young hunter who faced a lion alone might be remembered as reckless, but also as brave. Mothers who sacrificed themselves for their children became stories of devotion, whispered beside the fire for generations. Every loss, every death, was folded into the collective memory, a reminder of the delicate line between life and oblivion. And yet, humans mourned not only the physical absence of those they loved, but the fragility of their own existence. Sleep became wary, even with fire nearby. Footsteps in the night were measured with extreme caution. Silence was not comfort, but warning. Humans learned to move as shadows themselves, careful, quiet, aware. Even the smallest gesture, an abrupt laugh, a misplaced stick, could attract attention from predators, listening beyond the circle of light. The lessons of loss also fostered innovation. Tools became sharper, spears longer, traps more cunning. Humans began to strategize not only for hunting prey, but for defending against the hunters that shared their world. They learned to anticipate the patterns of predators, to avoid their territories, to use the terrain to their advantage. Knowledge became a weapon, and memory became armor stronger than any hide or claw. Yet for all the planning and vigilance, death remained. Sometimes it came suddenly, leaving grief too deep for words. But in each of these moments, the survivors found resilience. They began to understand that endurance was not merely a matter of avoiding death, but of continuing in its shadow. The tribe that learned to rise after loss grew stronger with each trial. The tribe that forgot became prey. The fire, which had been a source of protection, became a source of ritual. Families would gather around it to speak of the lost, to honor them, to remind themselves and their children of the dangers they faced. In this ritual, mourning and memory intertwined. The fire held warmth, yes, but also the weight of history, of suffering endured and lessons learned. Every flame became a teacher, every spark a reminder of lives lived and lost. From loss came vigilance. Humans began to establish watch rotations more rigorously, to train children in the ways of the night, to test young hunters in simulations before letting them face true danger. The wisdom of the elders grew invaluable, for they had survived more nights than anyone else. They knew where predators were likely to strike, when the winds carried scent, how the stars could guide a safe journey. Humans learned to respect not only the predators, but the wisdom passed down from those who had faced them, and in this way, humans transformed grief into purpose. Each story of loss became a guide. Each night survived a small victory. The memory of the dead was etched into every action, every choice, every cautious step. Survival was no longer only physical, it was mental, emotional, and communal. Humans endured not because they were the strongest, but because they remembered, learned, and adapted. Even the youngest children felt these lessons. They learned early that the world outside the firelight was not friendly, that vigilance was necessary, that every member of the tribe had a role in survival. They watched, they listened, they absorbed the patterns of the night. And in doing so, they became the next generation of survivors, carrying forward the accumulated knowledge of countless losses. Through fire, through watchfulness, through the painful education of loss, humans began to carve a place for themselves in a world that seemed dominated by giants. The night remained dangerous, predators still roamed, But humans had begun to understand the rules of survival, not as conquerors, but as students of the earth, learning to walk lightly, to think ahead, to honor those who had fallen, and to protect those who remained. It was in this crucible of fear, grief, and memory that humanity learned one of its most important truths. Survival is never assured, but it is earned through care, unity, and knowledge. Life was fragile, but it was also precious, and every dawn that rose over the plains after a night of danger was a quiet triumph, a proof of resilience, a continuation of the story of humankind. And so, even as the night stretched long and the shadows moved in unpredictable ways, humans endured. They faced loss, they grieved, they learned, and they carried forward not just their bodies, but their understanding, ensuring that the next night would be slightly safer, slightly brighter, slightly more filled with hope than the one before. As humans grew accustomed to the rhythm of the night, they began to notice something remarkable. The hunters themselves were being watched. The predators that once ruled the forests and plains with complete freedom now encountered a new presence, humans who understood, who observed, who learned to anticipate their movements. What began as pure fear slowly transformed into strategy, and what had been prey became cautious, cunning participants in the eternal dance of life. Humans started by observing the behaviors of the beasts with patient attention. They watched how lions stalked their prey, how wolves circled in silence, how bears waited for opportunities to strike. These patterns, once terrifying, became lessons. They noted which times of day the predators were most active, which trails were safest, and which areas of the plains and forests to avoid. They began to see the subtle signs, a broken branch where a predator passed, footprints pressed into soft mud, tufts of fur caught on thorns. Each detail became part of a map that existed only in the mind, carried carefully from one generation to the next. Tools began to emerge alongside these observations. Spears were sharpened, tips hardened in fire, lengths adjusted to allow humans to keep a safe distance from claws and teeth. Stone blades were crafted to be light and durable, ideal for cutting and defending. Traps appeared, simple, clever devices that could snare or misdirect predators, giving humans a measure of control in an otherwise uncontrollable world. Knowledge and invention became weapons, far more potent than raw strength alone. With these new abilities, humans began to change the dynamic of their existence. Instead of fleeing at the first sign of a predator, they could now prepare. They built higher walls of stone around their temporary shelters. They arranged firewood to create layers of protection. They learned to create signals, smoke by day, sparks at night, to alert others of approaching danger. And gradually the predators began to respect this vigilance. They learned that the humans were no longer entirely defenseless, that the circle of fire and the sharp points of spears represented risk even to the mightiest hunters. This transition was not sudden. There were mistakes, misjudgments, and painful lessons. A spear that failed to pierce a predator could mean death. A misread track, an underestimation of the predator's speed, or a lapse in attention could cost lives. But humans were patient. Every failure was noted, every mistake analyzed. In the same way that they tracked the patterns of wolves and lions, they tracked the results of their own strategies, adjusting, refining, improving. Slowly, cautiously, they turned survival into mastery of circumstance. Hunting became both a necessity and a form of training. Young humans were taught to move silently, to anticipate, to read the land as much as the animals. They learned to approach water sources quietly, to avoid leaving scents that predators could follow, and to recognize the subtle sounds of movement that signaled danger. They discovered the importance of teamwork, hunters moving together, covering one another, supporting each step with coordination, honed through trial and observation. Alone, a human was fragile. Together, humans could shape the environment around them, subtly bending the world in their favor. In this era, courage was measured not by strength, but by intelligence and foresight. A brave hunter was one who could read a lion's intent before it attacked, who could predict the bear's path across the valley, who could outmaneuver the wolf pack without ever striking. Skill became the new weapon. Strategy, patience, and understanding the rhythms of nature replaced brute force as the primary tools of survival. Humans were still small, still vulnerable, but the gap between predator and prey began to shrink, and with this skill came a new sense of confidence. Humans began to venture farther from the safety of the fire. They explored rivers, climbed ridges, crossed plains they had once avoided. They experimented with new forms of hunting, combining observation with traps, using fire to drive prey or illuminate the path of danger. Each expedition carried risk, yet each risk brought knowledge. Over time, humans learned to predict the behaviors of the animals around them, to shape the environment in subtle ways that favored their survival. This change did not mean humans dominated the beasts. Lions still hunted, wolves still circled, bears still claimed the dens. But humans had entered a partnership of sorts, a relationship defined by mutual awareness. They respected the strength of the predators and learned from it rather than confronting it directly. By understanding the hunters, humans became, in a sense, hunters themselves, not of the animals, but of knowledge, of understanding, of opportunity. Through observation and adaptation, humans refined not only their physical abilities, but their mental ones. They developed memory systems, carefully noting the outcomes of each encounter. They taught each other the signs of danger: a snapped twig, a disturbed patch of grass, the unusual silence of the forest. These lessons were shared orally, embedded into songs and stories that conveyed critical knowledge without the need for written language. Each tale, each cautionary story, became a repository of survival wisdom. Humans also began to experiment with distraction and deception. They discovered that certain sounds or movements could mislead predators, that fire could be used to drive animals into specific paths, that a well-placed trap could remove threat without direct confrontation. Intelligence and cunning became their armor, and patience their shield. The predators were formidable, but the humans, who had learned to watch, to plan, and to act, were no longer helpless. And yet, vigilance was never complete. Each night required attention. A single lapse could erase weeks of careful planning. A new predator, inexperienced in observing humans, could strike unpredictably. A familiar path could become dangerous if the predator adapted. Life in this era was a continuous exercise in awareness, a dance of risk and reward. Every success built confidence, every failure reinforced caution. Humans learned that survival was an ongoing process, one that required perpetual engagement with the world around them. Through this careful study, humans began to understand balance. They did not need to destroy every predator to survive. They only needed to respect the creature's power and position themselves wisely in relation to them. By observing, planning, and working together, humans created a fragile equilibrium in which both humans and predators could continue to exist. Knowledge became the invisible fence that kept the fires burning and the children safe. Over time, this understanding shaped the culture of early humans. Rituals were born out of survival practices, marking dangerous areas, noting predator movements, teaching young hunters through imitation and storytelling. Fire, observation, strategy, and memory became intertwined, forming the foundation of human resilience. The hunters who had once been observed had now become the observers, and through this role, humans discovered a new form of mastery, one rooted in intelligence, community, and careful attention to the living world. In this transformation, humans began to recognize a profound truth. Survival was not simply avoiding death, it was understanding the world, respecting its dangers, adapting to its patterns, and protecting one another through vigilance and wisdom. The beasts were still strong, still deadly, but humans had discovered that thought could compensate for size, that strategy could compensate for strength, that knowledge could carve safety from the teeth of danger. And so, in the cold darkness of ancient forests and icy plains, humans endured. They learned to see as predators saw, to move as silently, to think as relentlessly. The night was no longer only a time of fear. It became a space in which humans proved their ability to adapt, to survive, and to transform their vulnerability into a quiet, enduring power. In the watching, the remembering, and the planning, humans had turned themselves into something more than prey. They had become guardians of their own existence. As humans observed and survived alongside predators, their minds began to transform fear into imagination. The great beasts that stalked the forests and plains were no longer only living threats. They became figures in the stories whispered around the fire, creatures imbued with spirit and meaning, lions, bears, and saber-toothed cats, once merciless. Hunters became characters in the earliest myths, each tale carrying lessons as well as warnings. Around the fire, the elders spoke of the night with reverence. The glowing eyes of a cave lion were said to hold the wisdom of the stars. The roar of a bear was the voice of the earth itself. The swiftness of the saber-tooth was likened to the wind that could neither be caught nor tamed. These were not mere stories for entertainment. They were maps of understanding, encoded with the knowledge necessary to survive. The myths taught which places were dangerous, which times to avoid, and how to honor the power of these creatures. Children listened with wide eyes as the flames flickered, shadows dancing across stone walls. They imagined the beasts as larger than life, creatures that could see into the hearts of humans. Each roar became a character in the grand theatre of the night, each rustle of grass a plot twist to be anticipated. The firelight illuminated carving. On the walls, hands pressed into stone beside sketches of predators, claws etched next to the figures of hunters. These images were the first forms of recorded memory, blending imagination and survival into a single act. The myths also provided comfort in the face of relentless danger. While humans feared the predators, the stories offered a way to conceptualize their power, to respect it rather than be paralyzed by it. A saber-toothed cat was not merely a threat, it was a teacher. A bear was not only a killer, it was a guardian of the land, a reminder of the strength and unpredictability of the world. By turning fear into story, humans found a way to live with it, to give shape to the shapeless terror of the night. Some myths described battles that never happened, epic struggles between humans and beasts where cleverness and courage triumphed over raw strength. These tales served as instruction as well as inspiration. They encouraged young hunters to move with care, to watch and learn, and to respect the power of what they faced. Every exaggeration was purposeful, every fantastical detail a lesson in vigilance and adaptation. The stories were a blend of reality and imagination, a survival manual wrapped in the cloak of narrative. The act of storytelling itself became ritual. When a new fire was lit, elders would recount the tales of their ancestors, the beasts they had seen, the losses they had endured, and the victories won. Songs were sung to mimic the growls and roars of the predators, teaching rhythm, timing, and attention to sound. Through these practices, humans internalized the behaviors of the predators, learning to anticipate their movements even before stepping into the darkness. The myths were not entertainment, they were training, a method of teaching that preserved life without the immediate presence of danger. The stories also served to create social bonds. Families huddled together, listening and learning. Children repeated the tales, correcting one another, practicing the details of movement and sound. In this way, knowledge was not only preserved but reinforced, embedded in every interaction, every repetition. The myths became communal memory, a collective wisdom that allowed the tribe to endure. In time, humans began to see patterns in the behavior of predators, mirrored in the natural world and in themselves. The cunning of a wolf reflected the cleverness required for hunting. The patience of a lion mirrored the need for endurance in tracking prey. The power of a bear symbolized the strength necessary to protect the young and the weak. By linking human traits to the behaviors of the beasts, the myths created a framework for understanding both the natural and social world. Cave walls became classrooms of imagination. Artists depicted hunts that had never occurred, creatures that were exaggerated, and heroes who embodied ideal traits. These images were repeated across generations, each storyteller adding their own interpretation, each child learning a slightly different nuance. The myths were alive, evolving with every telling, reinforcing not only survival techniques, but cultural identity, a shared history rooted in fear, courage, and observation. Even the dead were honored within these stories. A hunter, taken by a saber-toothed cat, might become a guardian spirit in the myth, watching over the tribe from the shadows. Ancestors who had died in bear attacks were said to have joined the mountains themselves, guiding future hunters with invisible hands. In this way, humans wove their own mortality into the narrative of survival, transforming grief into wisdom, loss into guidance. Over generations, these stories became a lens through which humans understood the world. The beasts were both literal and symbolic, representing the dangers of the land, the unpredictability of life, and the qualities needed to endure. Myths taught humans to think ahead, to respect the power around them, and to cultivate skills that were essential for survival. They became a bridge between instinct and intellect, connecting observation with imagination, fear with creativity, and experience with collective memory. Through myth, humans discovered that they were not alone in the universe. The world was vast and full of forces greater than themselves, yet understanding these forces, even in symbolic form, gave them power. By attributing spirit, intention, and story to predators, humans could anticipate their actions, respect their strengths, and navigate the world more safely. Myths became mirrors reflecting both the dangers outside and the qualities within, the courage, cleverness, and patience necessary to endure. The blending of reality and imagination fostered something profound, a sense of agency in a world where survival was never guaranteed. Humans learned to see threats clearly, to plan, to cooperate, and to internalize lessons in ways that no predator could predict. Knowledge became embedded in culture, in ritual, in song, and in story, ensuring that every generation inherited the cumulative wisdom of the past. Even as predators continued to roam, the myths softened fear into understanding. They offered guidance in moments of uncertainty, preserved the memory of those lost, and taught the young the rhythm of life in a dangerous world. The night remained. Dark, the shadows long, and the beasts ever vigilant, but humans had found a way to thrive in the presence of power they could not challenge directly. Through imagination, through narrative, and through the careful observation encoded in stories, humans claimed a fragile mastery of their environment, and so, around every flickering fire, in every cave and open shelter, the myths of the beasts were told again and again. They reminded humans of the dangers that had shaped them, the qualities required to endure, and the wisdom passed down from generations who had survived not through strength alone, but through patience, observation, and understanding. The beasts were feared, respected, and immortalized, and through these stories, humans discovered the first threads of culture, knowledge, and survival that would carry them far beyond the shadows of the night. As humans learned from fire, observation, and myth, they began to sense something deeper in the world around them, that survival was not simply about domination or conquest, but about balance. The predators they feared were not enemies to be destroyed, they were part of the world's rhythm, part of the cycle that sustained life. Humans began to see themselves not above nature, but within it, fragile yet capable of understanding, and slowly they adapted to live in harmony with the wild. They observed the cycles of the animals, when lions hunted and rested, when bears retreated to dens in winter, when wolves traveled in packs or spread apart in search of food. They noted the subtle patterns of seasons, the movements of prey herds, the places where water flowed and vegetation flourished. This understanding became the foundation of their survival strategies. Humans moved with care, always conscious of their place in the larger ecosystem, learning to act in ways that minimized risk while allowing the tribe to thrive. Hunting itself evolved. Humans realized that they could not simply strike at any animal they encountered. Prey needed to be taken thoughtfully, and predators needed to be respected. They developed strategies to hunt efficiently, taking what was needed without provoking unnecessary conflict with the beasts that shared their world. If a lion roamed too close to the tribe's camp, humans learned to redirect its path rather than challenge it directly. They studied the animal's habits, predicting their moves and adjusting their own behavior accordingly. Survival became a dance of understanding rather than a battle of brute strength. Rituals developed to reinforce this balance. Before setting out on a hunt, humans would whisper words of respect, offering gratitude to the spirits of the animals they would pursue. After a successful hunt, bones were buried carefully, remnants of the meal left in a way that honored life taken. These practices were not superstition alone, they were early expressions of ecological understanding. By maintaining respect for the power of predators and the sanctity of prey, humans learned to navigate the dangerous world around them with wisdom. Even fire, once a symbol of power against the night, became part of this balance. Humans discovered that they could use fire to protect themselves without disrupting the natural order entirely. Controlled flames warded off predators at night, but they did not consume the forests carelessly. Sparks were managed, embers nurtured, and smoke patterns observed not only to signal humans but to avoid attracting unnecessary attention from beasts. Fire became a tool of harmony as much as a shield of survival. The elders, steeped in years of observation and memory, taught the young about this balance. Children were guided to move silently, to respect the paths of predators, to recognize the signs of danger before it arrived. They were trained to track prey without leaving trails that predators could follow, to gather food without drawing unnecessary attention, and to understand that their actions had consequences far beyond the immediate moment. Every step, every choice, was informed by the principle that humans were part of a wider world, not apart from it. Stories reinforced these lessons. Tales told around the fire illustrated the dangers of arrogance, the consequences of greed, and the rewards of patience. Myths depicted hunters who ignored the natural order and paid the price, contrasted with those who respected it and survived. These stories became more than entertainment. They were guides to thoughtful living, embedding ethical and practical knowledge into culture. Children absorbed these lessons as instinctively as they absorbed the sound of the wind or the flicker of flames, internalizing the rhythm of life and the necessity of careful observation. Over time, humans noticed patterns beyond individual animals. They understood migration routes of herds, how weather influenced predator movements, and how changes in one part of the environment affected the rest. Knowledge of these interconnections became vital. By respecting the cycles of the wild, humans could anticipate danger, find sustenance, and make choices that maximized safety and efficiency. They were learning the earliest forms of environmental intelligence long before words existed to describe it. Even conflict between humans and predators took on nuance. A wolf or lion might threaten the tribe, but humans learned to minimize confrontation, to coexist in a state of cautious equilibrium. They discovered that showing respect through avoidance or ritual often prevented deadly encounters. They observed, adjusted, and learned. Through patience and careful study, humans achieved a fragile harmony with the powerful creatures that had once seemed unstoppable. This harmony extended beyond predators. Humans learned to live with the earth itself, rivers, forests, mountains, and plains. They understood where food could be gathered safely, where shelter could be found, and where danger was most likely to strike. Each action, from moving a branch to crossing a stream, was informed by awareness of the surrounding world. They began to see the invisible connections between predator, prey, and human, and through this understanding, they could navigate even the harshest environments. In these lessons, humans discovered resilience. Survival was no longer simply about reacting to immediate threats. It was about understanding patterns, anticipating danger, and moving in accordance with the flow of life. Courage became thoughtful, not impulsive. Strength became strategic, not raw. The tribe that mastered balance could endure storms, predators, and scarcity alike. The humans who lived in this way were no longer merely surviving, they were thriving in a dangerous world by respecting it, by becoming part of it, and by carrying knowledge forward from one generation to the next. And so, in the long nights when the great beasts prowled and the darkness pressed close, humans endured not by dominating the world around them, but by understanding it. They adapted to the rhythms of the wild, listened to the lessons whispered by every step and every roar, and cultivated a harmony that allowed both humans and predators to coexist. The fire burned, the watchers remained vigilant, and the myths of the beasts reminded every tribe member of the delicate balance that held life together. Through patience, observation, respect, and collective memory, humans discovered one of the most profound truths of existence. Survival was not merely about strength or cunning alone. It was about learning, adapting, and living in harmony with forces greater than themselves. In this balance, humans found not only safety, but a kind of wisdom that would carry them far beyond the night, far beyond the shadows of the great beasts, and deep into the unfolding story of life on Earth. Even as humans learned balance, fire, and strategy, there remained a shadow that never fully faded, the echo of ancient fear. It lingered in the chest, a tightening in the stomach, the quickened heartbeat when eyes met glowing reflections in the dark. This fear was inherited, passed down through generations who had faced the sharp teeth, the clawed paws, and the silent, patient gaze of predators that knew the world better than humans ever could. It was a reminder that life was fragile and that survival required constant vigilance. This fear was not weakness, it was a guide, a silent companion that taught attention and caution. Humans learned to listen to it, to let it sharpen their senses, rather than paralyze them. The rustle of leaves became a signal to pause, the snap of a twig a warning to freeze, the distant howl of wolves an invitation to observe before acting. Fear became an ally, a teacher that embedded itself in the very instincts of the tribe. Those who ignored it were often lost. Those who respected it endured. Children learned this instinct early. Even before they could speak, they recognized danger through subtle cues. A sudden change in the wind, the faint scent of an animal, the unsteady flicker of the fire, all of these were interpreted with the inherited wisdom of fear. Elders would tell stories not only to entertain, but to reinforce these instincts, to cultivate attentiveness and awareness. The echo of ancient fear became a foundation upon which humans built skill, strategy, and endurance. Yet, fear alone was not enough. Humans discovered that action, guided by observation and memory, was necessary to survive. The fear that pulsed in the chest had to be paired with knowledge, with planning, with cooperation. A tribe that merely trembled at every shadow would not endure. But a tribe that recognized fear, learned from it, and acted with unity could turn danger into opportunity, threat into caution, and night into a proving ground for skill and patience. The echoes of fear shaped more than movement. They shaped culture. Rituals arose that honored the predators, the dangers, and the lessons they imparted. Ceremonies around the fire, chants mimicking the sounds of animals, dances that recreated hunts, all of these reinforced the bond between humans and the wild. The predators were no longer only obstacles, they were teachers, their power embedded in the structure of human life, their presence shaping behavior, values, and traditions. In the cold, the dark, and the silence of pre-dawn hours, humans became attuned to the smallest of signals. Every footstep, every breeze, every shift in shadow carried meaning. Even the smallest human could detect patterns in ways that the largest predator could not predict. Observation, memory, and instinct combined to create a form of awareness unique to humans, a kind of intelligence honed by fear, refined by experience, and reinforced by generations of survival. Predators continued to stalk, hunt, and claim the night, but humans had become something new. They had inherited fear, yes, but they had transformed it into knowledge. They had learned to predict, to plan, to cooperate. They had discovered that survival was not just about the body, but about the mind. A hunter could outthink a lion, anticipate a wolf, and avoid a bear, not because they were stronger, but because they understood, adapted, and respected the patterns of life around them. Stories continued to carry these lessons. The echo of ancient fear was embedded in myths of great hunts, of predators outwitted, of ancestors who survived against impossible odds. These stories were repeated across generations, each telling reinforcing instinct, strategies, and values. A child who heard the tale of a hunter trapped by a bear learned to observe paths carefully. A story of wolves outsmarted by humans taught patience and cunning. Through narrative, fear became education, terror transformed into training, and anxiety became preparation. Humans also discovered that fear was a bridge between individuals. A sudden cry in the night, the alarm of a watcher, the gesture of an elder warning of danger, these responses bound the tribe together. The echo of fear was collective, a shared rhythm that synchronized movement, attention, and action. Survival became communal, a coordination of instinct, intelligence, and vigilance. The echo of ancient fear was no longer merely personal. It became the heartbeat of the tribe, keeping the fire alive, the children safe, and the predators at bay. This awareness extended beyond predators to the environment itself. Humans learned to read the skies, to sense approaching storms, to interpret the signs of shifting seasons. The echo of fear, now paired with knowledge and observation, informed every decision. It guided when to migrate, when to hunt, when to hide, when to build. Fear became a compass, pointing toward caution, preparation, and foresight, ensuring that the tribe could endure even when the night seemed endless and the world indifferent. Over generations, humans internalized this lesson. Fear no longer merely caused anxiety, it shaped intelligence, attention, and empathy. It allowed humans to imagine the intentions of predators, to anticipate danger, and to protect one another. The echo of ancient fear became a tool, an invisible hand guiding the actions of the living in ways that strengthened the group and ensured the continuation of knowledge, culture, and survival. Even when the fire dimmed or the watchers grew weary, the echo persisted. It lived in the rhythm of the tribe, in the careful steps of hunters, in the vigilant eyes of the young, and in the songs and stories passed from one generation to the next. It was a reminder of fragility, of mortality, and of the lessons that the night had carved into human life. It was fear, yes, but fear transformed into wisdom, into strategy, and into a subtle power that predators could not understand. In this way, humans endured the night and the shadows, learning that survival was never guaranteed, yet always possible through awareness, cooperation, and respect. The echo of ancient fear, once a paralyzing terror, had become the foundation of resilience. Through fire, vigilance, myth, balance, and memory, humans discovered the first threads of mastery in a dangerous world. The night remained alive with predators and threat, but humans had found a way to live within it, to thrive despite it, and to carry forward the accumulated wisdom of countless generations. And so, as the dark stretched across the plains and forests, humans survived. They adapted, they learned, they watched, and they remembered. Fear guided them, fire protected them, and the lessons of the past shaped each step forward. In every heartbeat, in every glance, in every story told beside the flickering flames, humans embraced the delicate balance of life. They had become more than prey, they had become the keepers of knowledge, the guardians of survival, and the inheritors of the world, even in the shadow of the great beasts. The first hints of dawn crept across the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. The night was ending, but its lessons lingered, etched into the minds and bodies of the humans who had survived its perils. Every step taken in darkness, every flicker of fire, every silent observation of predators had been a small triumph, a victory against fear and uncertainty. The dawn was not merely a shift in light, it was the first reward of resilience, the quiet acknowledgement of human ingenuity and endurance. As the sun rose, hunters emerged from the shadows, moving carefully, yet with confidence. Their eyes, trained by countless nights of vigilance, scanned the landscape for signs of both prey and predator. The echoes of ancient fear were still present, but they no longer constrained action. Instead, they informed it, guiding each step with precision. Humans had become thinkers, observers, strategists, creatures who could read the language of the world in ways no predator could match. The fire, which had been a shield through the long darkness, now offered warmth and light to begin the day. Children gathered near the flames, imitating the movements of their elders, learning the rhythms of survival. They practiced stealth, patience, and observation, carrying forward the skills honed over generations. In every glance, in every gesture, the lessons of the night were preserved, Knowledge had become tangible, a force as vital as any weapon, shaping the tribe's very ability to endure. The prey of the plains and forests moved in cautious freedom. Herds grazed where humans had learned to tread lightly, aware that the watchers of the fire might strike if necessary, but also careful to maintain balance. The first triumph of humans was not in domination, but in understanding, knowing when to act, when to wait, and how to coexist with the living world around them. Each meal secured, each shelter defended, each night survived became part of a growing confidence, a growing mastery over the dangerous world that had once seemed unconquerable. Elders gathered, recounting tales of the night's lessons. Even the smallest details were noted, the movement of a predator, the smell carried on the wind, the signs in the tracks left on soft earth. These observations were passed down not merely as instructions, but as narratives that carried meaning, context, and emotion. Every child who listened absorbed not only knowledge but also the rhythm of life, the pulse of survival, the careful dance between fear and courage, between danger and triumph. Humans began to experiment more boldly. They used fire to drive prey, created traps with greater ingenuity, and coordinated hunts that required planning and cooperation. Each act was informed by observation, memory, and collective knowledge. The predators, still formidable, had become part of a complex equation rather than an uncontrollable force. Humans were no longer entirely at the mercy of the night. They had begun to influence it, shaping outcomes with thought, strategy, and community. This emerging control over their environment fostered confidence that went beyond immediate survival. Humans began to recognize patterns not only in animals but in the cycles of the earth. They observed seasons, weather, water sources, and the migration of herds. They noted how predators reacted to these changes and adjusted their actions accordingly. Every observation reinforced the connection between humans and their world, creating a profound understanding that extended beyond fear and necessity. The dawn illuminated more than the land. It illuminated possibility. Humans realized that intelligence, collaboration, and careful observation could compensate for physical weakness. They had survived nights when every shadow carried threat, when every sound might signal death. And now, in the first light of morning, they recognized their own power, the power to endure, to adapt, and to thrive. Every dawn henceforth carried this quiet victory, a ritual acknowledgement of survival earned through vigilance, wisdom, and unity. As days turned to weeks and weeks to generations, this rhythm of survival became culture, embedding lessons of respect, observation, and strategy into every action. Humans were no longer passive creatures of fear. They had become active participants in the natural world, learning its laws, navigating its dangers, and shaping their fate with skill and intelligence. Triumph was measured not in conquest but in survival against the odds, in the quiet confidence of a community that had endured the night and emerged wiser. And so, with each rising sun, humans claimed the first real victories over their fears. They had transformed terror into understanding, loss into wisdom, observation into mastery. Every step taken in harmony with the rhythms of the world became a triumph, a testament to the perseverance that would define humankind for millennia to come. The predators remained, the night persisted, and danger endured, but humans had discovered something more powerful than any claw or tooth, the ability to endure, to learn, and to carry knowledge forward. The dawn of the first human triumph was not a single moment of glory, but a continuous unfolding of resilience, patience, and ingenuity. Every fire lit, every story told, every watchful night, and every careful step was a thread in the tapestry of survival. Humans had begun to understand the delicate balance of life and death, danger and safety, fear and courage. In embracing these lessons, they had not only survived, they had taken the first steps toward mastery over the challenges of an unpredictable world. And so, as the sun climbed higher, casting warmth across plains, forests and mountains, humans walked forward with quiet confidence. They were small, fragile and mortal, yet they had endured the shadows and emerged wiser. Fire, myth, observation, memory and fear had shaped them. Through these tools they had transformed peril into understanding, threat into guidance, and darkness into the dawn of possibility. The first human triumph was not in defeating the world, but in understanding it, respecting it, and learning to thrive within it. In the quiet hum of the morning, with predators watching from afar, and the land awake with life, humans had earned their place. The night's lessons were not forgotten. They were embedded in the mind, the body, and the culture of every member of the tribe. And in that, humans discovered something eternal, that survival was more than existence. It was wisdom, foresight, and courage interwoven with every heartbeat, a triumph that would echo through countless generations to come.